I'm really excited today to begin a brief series on this legendary person named Samson. These next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at Samson, and I think this will be particularly relevant to men. It's going to be relevant to women as well, there's no doubt about that, but to men specifically. Now, I have a list here of men that were all mentioned in a. You want to move that back? I don't know how that flipped forward too. There we go. Whoop. There we go. Thank you. But these fellas were all listed in the same article, and you might ask yourself, well, now what do they all have in common? King David, and that's not actually his picture. That's a drawing of King David. But Bill Clinton, former president, Pete Rose, Barry Bonds, Kobe Bryant, John Daly, and Michael Jordan. What's that, John's name? Yeah, well, I thought I had it spelled right because it doesn't have an E in it, I know. And so I was surprised when I looked up there and saw it had the E in it now. But Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods was also listed in this article. And I thought, well, now what do all these people have in common? Well, you might say they were all leaders, which they certainly were in their field. You might say they were all champions or winners or successful or something like that. But interestingly, the title of the article that I was looking at is When Mighty Men Fall, How a Lack of Self-Control Can Derail Success. And the whole article described how each of these fellas had great potential for strength and success in their life. But because of a lack of self-control, they self-destructed. Pete Rose had trouble with gambling. John Daly had trouble with spending and some drinking. And Michael Jordan, he kind of gave up his main sport, wanted to go to baseball, try something completely different. Bill Clinton, we know about his difficulties. And so as you go down the list, all of them were kind of at the peak of their potential. And then because of bad choices, things began to collapse or self-destruct. I think to myself, we all struggle a little bit with the issue of self-control. In one area or another, we have difficulty with self-control. Now, a simple definition of self-control would be this: it's rejecting wrong desires and doing what's right. That's the exercise of self-control. We reject what we might be tempted to do or what we want to do or what we're inclined to do or even what's second nature for us to do. We reject wrong desires and we do what is right. For example, if you're a young person here today, there are going to be times in your life when you're going to have to make decisions. And depending on what decision you make, the rest of your life is going to unfold from that. You could make a decision that you have to live with the rest of your life. The moment you may realize how important it is, but you may not even realize how important it is. You may think, I can do this and I can get away with that, or I can do that, and it might be bad for, a little while or something, but hey, and yet there are people living in their later years who have regrets just because they made the wrong decisions along the way. You see, self-control is what will protect you from getting caught up in something that you didn't see coming. Oh, in retrospect, you'll say, I should have seen it coming. But you see, there's something about when we give up self-control that we get blindsided by things. Without self-control, things kind of catch us off guard. And it might be some addiction that you get caught up in. It could be that you're living with the hurt and the pain or the scars of whatever you did way back then. If you're married, there will be moments when, unless you exercise self-control, you might do something that would cost you your marriage. Or it could cost you your relationship with your kids. Or it could cost you your job, your ability to provide. You see, we all need self-control in our lives. And I think particularly men need to be able to exercise self-control. Samson struggled with self-control. And eventually it cost him his life. The lack of self-control actually leads us to self-indulgence. It leads us to, instead of controlling what we do, we just do what feels good. And that's particularly dangerous in our culture. We even have a advertising slogan. You know, just do it. Go with what you feel. Just do whatever you really want to do. I mean, it's all about you anyway. We need self-control. The problem is, you see, we all have this great God-given potential. It's our will, our self-discipline, that is sometimes so weak that the potential is short-circuited. We actually self-destruct. That's what we're going to kind of see here in the life of Samson. Now I'm going to ask that you'll turn to Judges 14 today. You can find the whole story about Samuel. I mean, there are references elsewhere, but the whole story of Samuel is really in Judges 13, 14, 15, and 16. And that's where we're going to be in the next few weeks. And as you look that up, let me just summarize some of what we find in chapter 13 to kind of give us a foundation. Then we'll get into chapter 14 and see that in Samson's life in particular, there were three things that can make strong men weak if we're not careful. Judges 13 through 16 are the chapters. Now, Samson's strength and his accomplishments are really legendary. We know all about those and how he was so strong, and he had to keep his hair uncut, and that's how he kept his strength. And we have some people in our church actually grow their hair really strong, trying to be strong, grow it really long. We know those stories. We also know the stories of his weaknesses. We know all about Samson and Delilah. But there's a lot more to it than just that. The truth is, he was like many of us men. God had given him so much potential. But you see, again and again and again, he makes these bad decisions. Often, decisions that are just indulging himself. And as a result, he self-destructs. Just like you. God has given you great potential to do good, to contribute to God's purposes and God's kingdom movement, and yet time and again Samson would make these bad choices. Samson was an incredibly strong man. That keeps skipping one extra. If you're able upstairs, you'll have to bring it back each time, because every time I hit it, it jumps two. So it should just have on there that Samson was an incredibly strong man with a dangerously weak will. And I think that would be the banner that I would hang over his life. What a difference it could have made if he exercised self-control. I mean, if he had been able by his will to say, I am going to reject what is wrong. I'm going to do what is good. What a difference it would have made. But we can't criticize him too much because that's just like you and just like me. I see that in my own life. You have incredible potential given to you by God. But the majority of us also have a dangerously weak will. Now, the book of Judges actually describes a time when the people of Israel were not really being obedient to God. They'd gone into the land. God had given them the land. They were supposed to do kind of some mop-up operations to actually clear the land of other peoples so that they could establish life the way God had instructed them to do. But they didn't really do that. They kind of just did enough, but they didn't really complete the mission. And as a result, they often found themselves living under somebody else's domination. At this particular time, they were living under the domination of the Philistines. And it was during this time that God would raise up judges. They didn't have a king. God was really their leader, and they, Moses, Joshua, they were both dead, and so he would raise up a judge, and that judge would be a deliverer. That judge would come in and try to give them some relief from the oppression that they were living under. And that's who Samson was. Samson was one of these judges. In chapter 13, you would find that an angel actually appears to a couple who is barren. They haven't been able to have children. And he says, you are going to have a son, but that son is to be set aside to the Lord. He's not going to be a priest. He's not going to be a prophet, but he's to be set aside for the Lord's use. And to do that then, they as a whole family were instructed that they should live under what was called the Nazirite vow. Now, for that, we'll see how many of this jumps. I just want the first one. Jump 2. The Nazirite vows were actually a way for a non-priest, an ordinary person, to be able to make a vow to God that indicated they were setting themselves apart for his use. Let's go through some of these verses here. It says, this is in Numbers chapter 6, by the way, that you find the Nazirite vows. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, a vow of a Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes, fresh or dried. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. So that's one of the vows. One of the vows is never get drunk. Stay away from the grapevine. Then it goes on. All the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head, until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord. He shall be holy, which really means set apart. He shall let the locks of hair of his head grow long. That's his second vow. Never cut your hair. Then it goes on. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his father or his mother, for brother or sister. If they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All the days of his separation, he is holy to the Lord. So those are the three aspects of this Nazirite vow. No alcohol, no haircuts, and never touch anything dead. That indicated that you were set apart for God. And you kept yourself from things that might compromise your ability to exercise that self-control that would keep you focused on God's will. You might say, well, what's this? What's the thing about cutting your hair? I mean, what's that got to? Is there something magic about that? No, the cutting of the hair was similar. You know, it's an outward indication of an inward reality. It would have been like baptism is for us. We are baptized as an outward expression of an inward reality. And that's the way it was with their hair not being cut. They allowed that to grow as a symbol that they were under the covering of God's authority. They were set apart for God's authority. Now, when it comes to Samson, he had this great spiritual potential. Take it back to 14. He had this great spiritual potential. When the power of God came upon him, I mean, we know that he took on 1,000 Philistines single-handedly. Philistine soldiers. We know that he could tear a lion apart with his bare hands. But because he lacked self-control, because he made bad choices, because he indulged his desires, he failed time and again. Now, what we're going to find today in chapter 14 is that Samson is just like us. I mean, he was actually willing to betray God for a handful of honey. You believe that? You see, just like us, his potential is great. It's his self-control that is the problem. It's not that he can't do it. God empowers him to do it. It's the choosing. It's the focus. It is the commitment to maintain being set apart for God's use. And he failed in that. He made wrong decisions, and it led to his destruction. Now, in Samson's life, we find three attitudes or three weaknesses that can squander our God-given potential. We'll begin in chapter 14 and verse 1. It says, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. And then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. If it was that easy, go get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, oh man, isn't there a woman among the daughters of your relatives, among all of our people? Do you have to get down there and take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? You weren't supposed to do that. But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. The first weakness we have is lust. Lust can be translated as I want it. I want it. I don't care what it takes, I want it. Are you sure that's a good decision? No, I want it. Go get her for me. That's what I want. That's what's good in my eyes. I want it. You see, the problem is that when lust takes hold of us, when our desire actually becomes lust, that I want it begins to rule everything else. It distorts the way that we see everything else. It's the only thing we can think about. It's what we want, and all logic just goes out the window. We're so focused on what we want. We're not even thinking about what's right. We're not thinking about what's smart. We just want what we want. That woman, that quick fix, that sexual thrill, or it could be something like that job advancement, or a new boat, or a new car. Whatever it is, lust overrules our self-control. And we will pursue what we desire with reckless abandon. got to tell you, once I had a great thing going with Ray Carter. Ray Carter got all my cars. That's why they lasted, and that's why they were cheap. And I told Ray, I said, now, Ray, I need another car, and he knew I liked convertible, and I'd like to stay in a convertible. Oh, I found just the thing for you. And it was this fantastic-looking Mustang that had been modified. It had everything on it was changed, and it was just, I want it. And I remember going out, and I thought, well, I'll test drive this baby. And I took it out, and fortunately, it was at night. Now, it had tinted headlights on it, and I'm saying to myself, I don't think I can see the street. Oh, I can do that. I'll figure out a way to live with that. There were several things with that car that, I like front-wheel drive. Gets me up and down the driveway when it's snowy, It had rear-wheel drive, of course. But that doesn't matter. I want it, baby. And it was costly. For my pocketbook, it was costly. But I know the lust for it. Now, eventually, fortunately for me, I don't know if it was my self-control or Ray Carter's smarts that overruled. I think it was that Dutch uncle there in Ray that saved me from that. But the truth is, that's what lust will do to you. So you start twisting everything that you see. You're not looking at things clearly. And you'll twist God's word a little bit to allow for this. And you'll twist logic and all of that stuff. That's what we see happening here with Samson. The Israelites had been commanded not to intermarry with the Philistines. But Samson, he traveled 4 miles from where he was down to Timnah. You got to do that by foot. What's he doing down there in the first place? What's he doing in a Philistine city in the first place? Maybe it had better nightclubs or something. I don't know, but it doesn't seem like he's there to do any good. He's going down there because of his own personal desires. And while he's there, he runs into this smoking hot Philistine gal, and his lust is kindled, and he wants her. It doesn't matter what God says. It doesn't matter what his dad says or his mother says. It doesn't matter what's right. It doesn't matter what's wise or smart. He wants what he wants, and that's all he could see. He wanted what he wanted, and self-control goes out the window. And over again, we see that where strong men are brought down by lust and the lack of self-control. Second thing we see is a sense of entitlement. A sense of entitlement is not so much I want it, but you know something? I deserve it. I deserve this. I've worked hard for this. Or, man, I've lived with her for so long and put up with so much. I deserve something better. Some way we talk ourselves into thinking that we should have more. That's really what we see here in Samson. Look at verse 5. It says, and so then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now they're going down there to talk to Delilah and try to swing something there. Behold, a young lion came toward them, roaring. And then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. And although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he didn't tell his father and mother what he'd done. Then he went down and talked with the woman. She was right in Samuel's eyes. Now, after some days, this is some time, right? After some days, he returned to take her, and he turned aside. Mistake. He turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and honey. And he scraped it out into his hands, and he went on eating as he went. He came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate, but he didn't tell them that he'd scraped the honey from the carcass of a lion. Why? Because that's nasty. I mean, that's crazy. You see, he is motivated by lust. He says, I want this girl. He persuades his parents to go with him to Timnah. He's going to try to arrange a marriage. And along the way, as he's traveling with them, this lion comes upon him. And barehanded, he tears this lion limb to limb. And sometime later, we don't know exactly how long, but sometime later, he's going that way again, and it says he turned aside. That's when we get into trouble. When we're on our way someplace and we get turned aside. Think about it. That's like us going down the road and we stop to go over and inspect roadkill. I mean, don't you think it's kind of crazy? That's what he's doing. It takes an effort, but it took time to stop and to go check that out. And then he finds that bees have been making honey in this carcass, and so he reaches in there and scoops it out. I want it, and I deserve it. I killed the lion. He's ripped it all apart. And now there's honey in it. That belongs to me. And so he breaks another vow. He's not supposed to touch anything dead. That's why he didn't tell his parents. Because he's breaking his vows. When you think about it, instead of thanking God and praising the God who gave him the power and the ability to slay this lion that protected him and his family, instead, Samson actually disobeys God. In his own way, he insults God. And for what? A handful of honey. I mean, how senseless is that? When you think about that, how stupid is that? To betray God for a handful of honey. But I can't be too hard on Samson because I know I do the same thing. I disobey God. I fail to do what is right for things that are ultimately worthless, senseless, just my own desires, and things that I think, hey, this is okay because I deserve it. It's mine. 3 things that can make strong men weak. Lust, I want it. Entitlement, I deserve it. And the third one is pride. Pride is, I can handle it. Hey, I'm strong. I can handle this. Look at verse 10. Now his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there. For so the young men used to do. As soon as the people saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. Now, interestingly, the word that is used there for feast, is a word that, here's the definition, a feast, a banquet, a dinner with a focus on drinking. With a focus on drinking. Craig Groeschel says that essentially Samson went down there and threw a big keg party. All these Philistines came and said, hey, wow, this is all right, man. Another vow broken. He knows he's not supposed to be around drink, and yet he throws this feast. And I'm sure he's thinking to himself, hey, that's okay. I can handle that. I can get close and yet not touch. I can go ahead and push up against the boundaries without crossing anything. I won't get myself in trouble. And how many people look back on their teenage years and say, I didn't realize how close I was getting to the edge. I was playing it as close as I could, and I got burned. And I can't go back and do anything about it now. See, that sounds familiar to me. We can see a new car and we say to ourselves, I want it and I deserve it. And I can handle the payments. I mean, sure, it's a little steep, but I can handle it. That's just pride. I can make it work. I can stretch things to make it fit. Well, we know it's not wise to take that drink or take that pill or increase our prescription. But hey, I want it. I deserve it. I need it. I'm different. I can handle it. I can keep it under control. And before we know it, that debt is handling us. That drug is handling us. That alcohol is handling us. You see, lust, entitlement, and pride, 3 things that will make a strong man weak if we fail to exercise self-control. Now, eventually, because of this lack of self-control, Samson's life, it really takes a turn for the worse. This man who was chosen by God for his purposes, possessing great potential, strongest man in the world, he ends up with his hair cut, his strength gone, his eyes gouged out, in chains and on display at like a big carnival, almost like a big worship thing where people are going by and he is the laughing stock. Public laughing stock. You see, that's a problem that we can all find in our own lives if we fail to develop self-control. Because at one point, we all say, hey, I can be anything I want to be. I've got this potential. I can do things. I can conquer the world. But then there comes a time when, because we made the wrong choices in life, we gave in to our desires rather than doing what was right, we find that our marriage is a total disaster, and we realize it was mostly our fault. Or we find that our kids don't want to have anything to do with us. They don't respect us. They don't look up to us because of choices that we may have made along the way. Or there comes a point in our life where suddenly our private life is kind of made public, and we are completely humiliated and devastated, all because of the choices that we made along the way. You see, my message today is that those are the vulnerabilities. They are the risks, the weak spots, our Achilles heel. But men, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to be a victim. You don't have to live your life feeling like you're being pushed and pulled by your desires. That's what God has given us self-control for. That's what self-control is all about. It means taking charge of your life. Now, we have talked about some of the things that can make a strong man weak. Let me just very quickly, without detail, give you 3 suggestions on what can help weak men become strong. First is, rather than I want, it's I want God. I want God. You may wonder why there's a steady diet from this pulpit that pushes you towards real discipleship. Not just casual Christianity, but really being devoted for Christ. really taking up the cross for Christ, really following him in the mission that he is about in the world. If we listen to that, it will change everything about our lives. But that's what it's all about. That's what will build your self-control, is when I want God. I want his word. I want his guidance on my path, his light on my path. I want his voice leading in my heart. I want to do his will. Self-control comes not only from we have to obey God, but because I want to obey God. The good news is his Spirit will produce that fruit in you, the fruit of self-control, if we choose to seriously follow him. Not so much I'm entitled as I deserve death. We tend to say, I deserve it, but the truth is, I deserve death. The truth of the matter is, God doesn't owe us anything. We have all sinned against God. We all know what guilt is because we have all experienced it. And so we're just fooling ourselves when we think that because we've been such a good person, or because we've tried really hard, or because we're doing the best we can, or we've suffered so much, that some way we deserve God's blessing. We do not deserve it. All we deserve is death. And you see, when we finally realize that, then we're humbled before God. Then we're living thankfully before God, thankful for his grace, and that he's even willing to do something wonderful and powerful in our lives, to use us to reach our oikos. We don't deserve that. It's not because there's something really special about you that God has decided to use you. God loves you. And he'll take your weakness and he will be strong in that. He will rush upon you with power and influence and wisdom to say what you need to say, to live the way you need to live, to exercise the self-control you need to exercise, so that he can work through you to further his kingdom with the people that he has supernaturally and strategically placed in your life. And then instead of saying, I can handle it, and being proud, we are humble and say, I can't handle anything without God. I can't handle anything without God. In fact, without God, I am liable to do anything unwise or self-destructive. There's nothing that I couldn't find myself falling into. You see, we can't really trust ourselves. We can't really trust our judgment and what we think we see. We can't trust our motives and why we think we're doing something. When we try to say, oh, I can handle things, I'm strong enough to handle that, we're just lying to ourselves. We're deceiving ourselves. But you see, the good news is the Bible says that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. Satan loves to find ways to make strong men weak, to bring them down. And Satan wants to take you down. But God delights in making weak men strong. And he can give you self-control and fulfill the potential that God is building into you. Let's pray.